The human being is not divided into two completely separate kingdoms, called the mind and the body. We often speak as though the body is merely a machine, and the mind is something that watches from a distance. Yet our deepest experiences reveal something more mysterious. Fear can make the heart race. Grief can make the body feel heavy. Anxiety can disturb sleep, appetite, breathing, and energy. Likewise, a sense of safety can soften the muscles, calm the breath, and create a feeling of inner spaciousness. The relationship between the psyche and the body is therefore far more intimate than we sometimes recognize. When a person repeatedly speaks to himself with words of defeat, those words can become part of his inner world. I am weak. I will never get better. My body is failing me. There is nothing I can do. When repeated long enough, such statements can become psychological patterns. They may influence the way a person interprets every sensation, every setback, and every difficult day. The problem is not that words possess magical power over disease. The deeper issue is that the words we repeatedly accept can shape our attitude toward life. This is where the conscious voice becomes important. You can begin speaking to yourself differently, not with denial, not with false promises, not by pretending that pain does not exist. Instead, you can choose words that create courage within you. Say, I will care for this body. Say, I will listen to what I need. Say, I am allowed to hope. Say, this moment is difficult, but I am still here. Such words do not replace medical treatment, and they do not guarantee an instant physical cure. Their purpose is deeper. They can change the psychological atmosphere in which you face your circumstances. The unconscious is influenced by repetition, emotion, and imagery. If your inner dialogue is constantly filled with catastrophe, your world can begin to feel smaller. Every sensation becomes a warning. Every difficulty becomes evidence that something is hopeless. But when you introduce compassion and courage into that inner dialogue, you create another possibility. Imagine speaking to your body as you would speak to someone you deeply love. You would not insult that person for being tired. You would not condemn them because they were struggling. You would not tell them that their pain makes them worthless. You would probably say, I am here. Let us take this one step at a time. Why should your relationship with yourself be any different? Perhaps this is one of the most important transformations a person can make, to stop treating the body as an enemy and begin treating it as a messenger. Pain may require professional attention. Fatigue may require rest. Emotional distress may require support. The body continually communicates, and wisdom begins when we learn to listen rather than immediately judge. Faith, understood psychologically, can become a relationship with possibility. It says, I do not know exactly how this story will unfold, but I refuse to surrender my entire future to fear. And sometimes that is where a different kind of strength begins, not in pretending that everything is perfect, but in discovering that even in uncertainty, you can speak to yourself with dignity, patience, compassion, and hope. Deep within the human psyche, there exists a remarkable capacity to transform suffering into meaning. Across cultures and throughout history, human beings have imagined the figure of the healer, the wounded guide, the wise elder, and the person who passes through darkness and returns carrying a deeper understanding of life. These images are not merely stories from distant civilizations. They reflect something fundamental within the human imagination, the desire to believe that suffering does not have to be meaningless. When a person experiences physical or emotional pain, the immediate response is often fear. The mind begins asking, why me? What if this gets worse? What if nothing changes? Such questions are understandable, but when they dominate consciousness, suffering can become psychologically larger than the original experience. The person no longer experiences only the pain in the body. They begin carrying an entire story of helplessness around it. Faith can interrupt that story. Faith does not necessarily mean believing that every illness will disappear instantly. It can mean maintaining an inner relationship with hope, even when circumstances remain uncertain. It can mean saying, I cannot see the entire path, but I will continue walking. In psychological terms, this changes the position from which you encounter suffering. You are no longer merely the helpless person waiting for life to happen to you. You become an active participant in your own inner transformation. Consider the ancient image of the wounded healer. The healer is not someone who has never experienced pain. The healer is someone who has entered the territory of suffering and learned something there. This does not mean that suffering is good or that illness should be romanticized. Rather, it suggests that an experience can contain more than one dimension. Pain can hurt the body while simultaneously awakening questions about meaning, identity, priorities, relationships, and the way we live. Perhaps your difficulty is asking you to become more compassionate toward yourself. Perhaps it is revealing how much fear you have carried. Perhaps it is teaching you to slow down after years of ignoring your own needs. Perhaps it is reminding you that your worth was never dependent upon being strong every moment. The inner healer begins to awaken when you stop asking only, "How do I get rid of this?" and begin asking, "How can I meet this experience with greater consciousness?" That question creates psychological movement. You can close your eyes and imagine an inner figure representing wisdom, courage, or compassion. It may appear as a peaceful elder, a light in darkness, a protective presence, or simply the deepest and calmest part of yourself. Speak to that image. Ask what it wants you to understand. Listen without forcing an answer. This is not magic. It is a symbolic conversation with the deeper layers of your own psyche. And symbolism can be powerful, because the unconscious often communicates through images, rather than straightforward explanations. When you tell yourself, "There is still something alive within me," you are not making a medical prediction. You are affirming your relationship with possibility. When you say, "I can face today," you are not promising tomorrow. You are giving yourself permission to remain present. The wounded part of you may still be afraid, but another part can begin to say, "I am here with you. We will face this together." That inner relationship can become a source of courage as you continue seeking the practical, emotional, spiritual, and professional support that your circumstances require. There is a profound difference between experiencing a wound and becoming identified with the wound. When something painful enters our lives, the mind often begins to attach an identity to it. A person may begin by saying, "I am experiencing pain," and slowly move toward, "I am a broken person." The experience becomes an identity, and once an experience becomes part of identity, it can influence how we see every other part of ourselves. The human psyche has a tendency to organize experience into stories. We want to know who we are, why something happened, and what it means. If the story becomes centered entirely around suffering, then suffering can begin to occupy a much larger psychological space than it originally did. A temporary condition becomes a permanent definition. A difficult chapter becomes the entire book. This is why the language we use internally matters. Imagine someone who has been struggling with weakness for months. Every morning, they look at themselves and think, "My body is failing me." Eventually, that sentence may become so familiar that it feels like an objective truth about their entire existence. They no longer see themselves as a person who is experiencing difficulty. They see themselves as the difficulty, but you can create distance between yourself and your experience. Instead of saying, "I am weakness," you can say, "I am experiencing weakness." Instead of saying, "I am broken," you can say, "There is a part of my life that needs attention." Instead of saying, "My life is over," you can say, "I am living through a difficult chapter." The difference may appear small, but psychologically it is enormous. The first statements close the door of identity. The second statements leave room for movement. This does not mean denying illness, pain, aging, disappointment, or limitation. It means refusing to reduce the whole of your existence to one experience. You are always larger than the condition you are currently facing. A person can be afraid and still possess courage. A person can be tired and still possess dignity. A person can be suffering and still experience love. A person can feel lost and still contain the possibility of discovering a new direction. The psyche contains many different dimensions, and no single emotional state represents the whole personality. Jung's psychological perspective encourages us to look beneath the surface identity and discover the greater personality developing underneath it. What we consciously believe ourselves to be is often only one small portion of who we are. Your wound is visible, but so is your capacity to respond to it. Your fear may speak loudly, but it does not have to become the only voice inside you. When you speak life into yourself, therefore, do not use positive words merely as decoration. Use them to create psychological space. Say, "This is happening to me, but it is not all of me." Say, "I can listen to my body without becoming afraid of every sensation." Say, "I can seek help without seeing myself as powerless." Say, "I can experience uncertainty without surrendering my identity to uncertainty." There is strength in becoming the observer of your inner experience. You can notice the pain without becoming the pain. You can acknowledge the fear without allowing fear to define you. You can recognize the wound without forgetting the person who exists beyond it. And somewhere within that separation, the psyche begins to discover that suffering may be part of the story without becoming the author of the entire story. The unconscious does not communicate with us only through logical sentences and carefully organized arguments. Much of the inner world speaks through images, emotions, dreams, sensations, memories, and symbols. Long before a person can explain what they feel intellectually, they may already have an image inside them that expresses it. A dark room can represent uncertainty. A journey can represent transformation. A sunrise can represent renewed possibility. A tree growing through difficult soil can become an image of resilience. These symbols speak to something deeper than ordinary language. When you speak life into your body, therefore, your words can become more powerful when they are connected to meaningful images. Instead of mechanically repeating a phrase such as, "I will be okay," allow yourself to imagine what being okay means. Perhaps you see yourself waking in the morning with greater peace. Perhaps you imagine walking outside, breathing slowly, feeling the ground beneath your feet, and becoming aware that you are still participating in life. The image does not have to be perfect. It simply needs to carry emotional meaning. This is important because the unconscious responds strongly to what has emotional significance. A sentence repeated without feeling may remain merely a sentence, but an image connected with hope, safety, courage, or love can become psychologically meaningful. Imagine your inner world as a landscape. If you have spent years filling that landscape with images of catastrophe, failure, rejection, and helplessness, then fear may begin to feel like the natural climate of your existence. Every physical sensation becomes threatening. Every difficult moment confirms the old story. Your imagination becomes an instrument of fear. But imagination can also become an instrument of renewal. You can deliberately create different inner images. Imagine yourself standing beside a quiet river. The water continues moving even though stones interrupt its path. Imagine a tree whose branches have survived storms. Imagine a small flame protected from the wind. Imagine yourself walking through darkness, while carrying a light that does not illuminate the entire road, but gives you enough vision to take the next step. These images do not medically cure disease. They are not substitutes for diagnosis, treatment, medication, or professional care. Their value lies in the psychological meaning they can create. The human psyche often needs a picture of possibility before it can emotionally move toward possibility. This is why faith traditions throughout history have used symbols, stories, rituals, prayers, and visions. They give the mind something larger than fear to contemplate. A person who feels powerless may imagine being held by something greater than themselves. A person who feels lost may imagine a path. A person who feels wounded may imagine restoration. You can create your own inner language. When you place your hand gently over your heart, breathe slowly, and say, "There is still life within me." You are not making a scientific prediction about what will happen to your body. You are establishing a relationship with yourself. You are telling the frightened part of your psyche that it does not have to carry everything alone. You are reminding yourself that your present condition does not necessarily reveal the whole future. You are allowing hope to occupy the same psychological space where fear once stood alone. And when an image of life becomes emotionally meaningful, it can influence the way you face the present moment. You may become more patient with yourself. You may become more willing to rest. You may seek appropriate help instead of withdrawing. You may stop treating your body as an enemy and begin listening to it with greater compassion. The symbol becomes a doorway, not into magical thinking, but into a deeper relationship with the inner world that has been speaking quietly all along. There is a part of human nature that would rather hide pain than encounter it. When fear appears, we often try to cover it with optimism. When anger rises, we may pretend to be peaceful. When grief enters our lives, we may quickly tell ourselves to move on. We imagine that healing means becoming positive enough that the difficult parts of ourselves disappear. But the deeper layers of the psyche do not disappear simply because we refuse to look at them. What is rejected often remains present beneath the surface. Jung described this hidden territory as the shadow. The shadow contains aspects of ourselves that we have pushed away because they conflict with the image we want to maintain. It may contain anger, jealousy, fear, insecurity, resentment, shame, or even desires we are uncomfortable acknowledging. It does not mean that every impulse should be acted upon. Rather, it means that awareness is healthier than unconsciousness. Consider someone who constantly tells everyone, "I am strong. Nothing affects me." Perhaps this person has learned to survive by suppressing vulnerability. Whenever sadness appears, they push it away. Whenever fear appears, they become busy. Whenever exhaustion appears, they tell themselves to work harder. From the outside, this may look like strength. Inside, however, there may be a growing conflict. The body sometimes becomes the place where what has been ignored demands attention. This does not mean that every illness is caused by hidden emotions, nor should physical symptoms be dismissed as psychological. Medical conditions require appropriate medical evaluation and treatment. But psychologically, it is still valuable to ask what emotions we have refused to acknowledge. Perhaps you have been carrying grief that you never allowed yourself to feel. Perhaps you are angry because someone crossed a boundary, yet you keep telling yourself that everything is fine. Perhaps you are exhausted because you have spent years trying to satisfy everyone around you. Perhaps you are afraid, but you believe admitting fear would make you weak. Faith does not require you to pretend these feelings are absent. Real inner strength can begin with honesty. You can say, "I am afraid." You can say, "I am angry." You can say, "I am tired." You can say, "I do not understand what is happening." These statements are not declarations of defeat. They are acts of consciousness. When you name an emotion, you create a small distance between yourself and the emotion. Instead of being completely consumed by fear, you begin observing fear. Instead of becoming anger, you begin witnessing anger. Instead of allowing shame to define you, you begin understanding where it came from. This is the beginning of integration. The goal is not to destroy the shadow. The goal is to understand it. Even anger can contain information. It may reveal a violated boundary. Fear may reveal something that needs protection. Sadness may reveal something deeply valued. Exhaustion may reveal that the way you have been living is no longer sustainable. The unconscious often speaks through what we would rather avoid. Therefore, when you speak life into your body, do not speak only words of victory. Speak words of truth. Something inside me is hurting, and I am willing to listen. I do not need to be fearless to move forward. I can acknowledge my pain without allowing it to become my identity. I can face what is inside me without being destroyed by it. When you stop fighting every uncomfortable part of yourself, the inner conflict can begin to soften. You become less divided between the person you present to the world and the person you secretly experience within. And in that honest encounter with the hidden self, the psyche can begin bringing fragmented pieces of experience into conscious awareness, creating space for compassion, understanding, and a more authentic relationship with your own life. There are moments when suffering does not come only from what is happening around us, but from the conflict taking place within us. A person may know that something in life needs to change, yet continue living against that knowledge. They may say yes when every part of them wants to say no. They may remain silent when something inside them is begging to speak. They may constantly give to others while secretly feeling empty. They may present confidence to the world while carrying fear in private. When the outer life and inner life move in opposite directions for too long, the psyche can become exhausted. The conscious mind often wants certainty, approval, and control. It creates plans, follows expectations, and tries to construct an acceptable identity. But beneath this surface exists a deeper psychological life containing feelings, intuitions, memories, desires, fears, and values that may not always agree with the conscious personality. This tension can become a source of suffering. Imagine someone who has spent years choosing a career because their family expected it, while something within them longs for another path. Every morning they perform their responsibilities, but internally they feel increasingly disconnected. They may not immediately understand why they are unhappy. Nothing appears obviously wrong from the outside, yet an inner conflict continues. Another person may constantly care for everyone else while refusing to acknowledge their own exhaustion. They believe being needed makes them valuable. Whenever they consider resting, guilt appears. Eventually, they no longer know whether they are helping others out of love or because they are afraid of being rejected. These contradictions matter because the psyche seeks greater wholeness. Jung's concept of individuation describes a lifelong movement toward becoming more conscious of the different parts of ourselves and bringing them into a more integrated relationship. This does not mean becoming perfect. It means becoming more honest about who we are. Sometimes the body becomes part of this conversation. Again, this does not mean that physical illness is simply caused by psychological conflict. Such an assumption can be harmful and medically inaccurate. But our physical and emotional experiences can influence one another. And listening to our inner world can help us recognize when our way of living is creating unnecessary strain. Ask yourself quietly, where am I living against myself? Perhaps you constantly say you are fine when you are not. Perhaps you continue relationships that repeatedly diminish you. Perhaps you have forgotten how to rest because productivity has become your identity. Perhaps you are carrying expectations that were never truly yours. The purpose of these questions is not to create blame. It is to create awareness. When something inside you says, "I cannot continue like this," listen before immediately silencing it. When your inner world asks for rest, consider what your body is communicating. When sadness appears, allow yourself to understand what has been lost. When anger appears, ask what boundary may have been crossed. When fear appears, ask what you believe you might lose. This is how inner conflict becomes conscious. Instead of allowing unconscious tension to control your behavior, you begin observing it. And once you can observe the conflict, you have more freedom to respond to it. You can speak life into yourself without lying to yourself. You can say, "I am allowed to acknowledge what I feel." You can say, "I can make changes without destroying everything." You can say, "I can ask for help without considering myself weak." You can say, "I can honor my needs while still caring for others." The deeper movement is from self-abandonment toward self-awareness. You begin treating your inner voice not as an enemy demanding attention, but as information worthy of understanding. The more consciously you listen, the less necessary it becomes for your inner conflicts to remain hidden. And within that awareness, you can begin making choices that are more consistent with your values, your needs, and the person you are gradually becoming. The deepest form of transformation is not always the disappearance of every difficulty. Sometimes transformation begins when we discover that we can become different while moving through difficulty. There are experiences in life that we cannot immediately control. We cannot always choose what happens to the body, what other people do, how quickly circumstances change, or how long uncertainty remains. Yet we can gradually become more conscious of the person who is meeting those circumstances. This is where the idea of wholeness becomes important. A human being is not simply a collection of symptoms, achievements, fears, memories, and social roles. There is a deeper psychological process through which we continually discover who we are. Jung called this movement toward greater psychological wholeness individuation. It is not about becoming a perfect person. It is about becoming more genuinely yourself. When you experience difficulty, you may initially ask, "How can I make this disappear?" That question is natural. But another question can eventually emerge. Who am I becoming as I move through this? Perhaps you are becoming more patient. Perhaps you are learning to value your health instead of taking it for granted. Perhaps you are discovering that asking for help does not make you weak. Perhaps you are learning to separate your identity from your circumstances. Perhaps you are realizing that your worth was never dependent upon being strong every moment of every day. These discoveries do not make suffering desirable. They simply reveal that an experience can contain more than one dimension. Faith can become meaningful here, because faith does not have to be understood as a guarantee that every physical problem will immediately disappear. It can also be understood as an inner orientation toward possibility. It says, "I cannot see everything that lies ahead, but I will not allow fear to decide the meaning of my entire life." This distinction is important. There is a form of positivity that demands denial. It tells you to ignore pain, suppress fear, and pretend everything is perfect. But genuine faith can make room for honesty. You can say, "This is difficult," while also saying, "I still have hope." You can acknowledge uncertainty without surrendering to despair. You can seek medical care while maintaining spiritual confidence. You can recognize your limitations while continuing to develop your inner strength. You can cry and still have faith. You can feel exhausted and still possess dignity. You can be afraid and still take the next step. Speak life into your body, therefore, not as though words are magical commands that control every biological process, but as expressions of the relationship you want to have with yourself. Tell yourself, "I will not abandon myself." Tell yourself, "I will listen carefully to what my body needs." Tell yourself, "I will give myself permission to rest." Tell yourself, "I will seek the help I need." Tell yourself, "I will remain open to hope." These words become powerful when they are lived rather than merely repeated. If you say you value your body, care for it. If you say you value peace, create space for it. If you say you have faith, allow that faith to influence how you meet uncertainty. The journey toward wholeness is rarely dramatic. Often it happens quietly, through small decisions repeated over time. You become more honest with yourself. You become more compassionate toward your weaknesses. You stop demanding perfection. You learn to listen before reacting. You begin recognizing that the person you are today does not have to remain exactly the person you were yesterday. And perhaps the most important shift is this: instead of asking your life to become completely free of difficulty before you allow yourself to feel whole, you begin discovering wholeness in the way you consciously meet whatever life places before you.